Welcome back to the table, friends. I am your humble host, GreyDMs, and with me as always is my co-host and co-conspirator, Owen.
Hello there.
You are listening to Tabletop by Night, a weekly podcast where we continue our exploration of Vampire the Masquerade. Tonight, we gather around the table to answer the question, why are the Camarilla just better than you?
I mean, yeah, they really are, aren't they?
It just makes sense. All right. So we're going to be talking about a vampiric sect known as the Camarilla. That's a really rough word for me.
Is it?
Every time I say it, I'm like, my brain goes, did you say what you think you said, or did you say something similar?
It's funny because I've been listening really hard because my I need to correct what you just said senses kick in, but I was like, no, he said it right.
Oh man, it's a really, really close one.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be talking about the Camarilla and how they came to be, what you can expect from a Camarilla organization, what kind of structure they have, and some interesting tidbits about them, and especially what you need to know to play Vampire the Masquerade in a Camarilla-based setting.
Mm.
So let's rewind the dial a little bit. Let's rewind the time period.
Goodness. Okay.
So Vampire has always stated that the history is myth and legend. There is no definitive answers to what happened back then. And then they release splat books that actually tell you what happened. But those are not definitive answers. So bear in mind that all of this is loose mythology and, you know, what vampire elders have taught their children.
I see.
So in the beginning, there were vampires.
That makes sense.
So as vampires went through many different events, the rise and fall of Carthage, far previous to that, like the events took place in the city of Enoch, like way too much history that I'm glossing over very too quickly.
It sounds very biblical.
Oh, yes. There are very, very many ties between vampires and many of the biblical stories. But what we do know is that at some time during the Dark Ages, vampires were essentially lording over most of mortal creation. So vampires...
Like openly?
Sometimes quite openly. So vampire lords had the power, they had the knowledge, and they had the resources to control a population pretty well. But as humans started to come out of the Dark Age and started to build ways of staying in contact, find ways to building bigger cities, and basically organizing themselves, that power shifted. Now, this would ultimately lead to something called the Inquisition.
Oh.
So
I was not expecting that.
Oh, really?
No.
So the Inquisition was formed when the Catholic Church started to look around the world, and it decided that it needed to get involved in things and purge all the evils of the world.
Oh, goodness. It should have started with itself.
Hot take. Not wrong. So one of the things is, as they sent their inquisitors out, they sent their spies and their agents, and they collected information, they stumbled upon an agent of the devil, a vampire.
No.
So the Inquisition was born. The Inquisition was a mortal initiative funded by the Catholic Church, some of the certain kings, the state, monarchy.
Yeah, there you go.
To basically find evil and root it out, to burn it out if necessary. And a large portion of it was dedicated to battling vampires.
I mean, were there a lot of vampires? We're talking like really good numbers here.
So yeah, so in the time of the Inquisition, which is going to be the, I think, 1300s, late 1300s, vampires have been around since far before the Roman Empire. So you're talking about vampires, notably in these stories of 5th, 6th generation, who do have child or two. So figuring out how, powers work, you can figure out that there are quite a few vampires spread throughout the world. Vampires are still kind of selective over who they embrace.
Right.
Some of them. There are still vampire antediluvians walking around. And,
that's got to be scary.
Yeah. And one of the things that first happens is the Inquisition starts to get together and they start getting efficient at burning out vampire elders.
Oh, that's not good.
So let's say you're a vampire lord sitting in your castle having a great time, and a bunch of mortals show up, and you go out and you do your business and get rid of them. And then you wake up the next day on fire.
Wow. That happens?
Some of us.
There's a bookshelf in the way. Weird.
But no, mortals have the advantage of moving during daylight. And unfortunately, it rings true through the ages is vampires are not immune for public works.
No.
Hey, you can't hide in something if that whole village or that whole castle is just leveled to the ground.
Right. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I mean, you don't have the anonymity of a huge city at this point.
So as vampires were being dragged out of their burrows and their seats of power, most of the elder vampires started realizing, hey, guess what? They're not going to stop until they burn somebody out. So why don't I sell out either my rival or I'm going to make a quick childer and I'm going to go tell him, hey, there's that creepy guy in that castle over there. Why don't you go kill him?
That's I like that. It's kind of like a man in the iron mask sort of thing.
Very much so. So, needless to say, the neonates that were being embraced during this time period were not happy once they started realizing that was their purpose. So the neonates were perishing at an alarming rate during this time, as the Inquisition was often strangely informed of their movements and finding them. Specifically, this voice of dissent or anger found a voice through a bruja named Patricia. And Patricia expressed this need of her people to a vampire eldar who was very influential during this time, known as Hardstad the Elder.
Hardstad
the Elder.
I think of an uncle named Van.
We actually encountered him in our Dark Ages.
Did we?
Dark Ages book, yeah. At the time, I think they wrote him in that he was the Prince of England or Prince of London.
That was convenient for him.
But Hardstad was a 5th generation of Ventru.
Ooh, so very influential.
Yes. He had a habit of ruling by embracing Childer and having the Childer go out as something akin to roving judges. So they would go into a political arena where there are other vampires and enact the will of Hardstad.
I am the law.
So the need for these elders to stand up and fight against the mortal humans was expressed. And Hardstad and his elders basically said, nah, we're not risking our necks. I'll just go embrace them more and send them to the wolves.
Not my prep.
Yeah, they felt it was better to hide. They did, however, begin talking amongst themselves and started coming up with a set of rules that might help them hide. This will become important down the road. However, disgusted with this concept, Patricia left and basically started talking to the other neonates and doing what Bruja do.
Yeah.
A little tidbit here. Patricia was embraced in a little old place called England. And she was embraced while captive because she was thrown in jail for inciting a protest, like a little mini rebellion. And a little old guy called Robin Hood embraced her. This vampire was fucked up.
Robin Hood. Oh, that name. I know. Oh, God. A Robin of Locksley. I know.
Specifically, Robin, the Prince of Nottingham, embraced her. It's like, that's cool. All right. That's how we're doing this.
And he was a Bruja.
Yeah, he was a Bruja.
Wow, I was not expecting that.
Well, Bruja do believe that they have ideals that they'll lead up to, and they like punching rich people. So, I mean, it kind of goes into...
Yeah, I mean, true. That's... I did not know that. You learn that makes the Disney movie a little more, different.
Yeah, you can see that dressed up fox going over and be like, hey, you look like you like to start trouble. So Patricia left obviously her meeting with Hardstad and the other elders and started gaining up people, and they got together and they started brewing, started getting all ticked off. And they basically brewing Bruja, and they basically marched. They started the Anarch Revolt, the first Anarch Revolt. A pivotal point of this is where they marched into Castle Hardstad, and basically a giant battle ensued with Hardstad forces, and of course, angry Bruja were potent when they're riled up. And although she was heavily injured during the process, she found a more injured Hardstad and committed diablerie.
Whoa!
Yes, she committed the amaranth, the act of diablerie. Now, funny enough, the Venture don't like weakness.
No.
So Hardstad's kid started masquerading as him, and he was known as Hartstad the Younger.
Oh.
They didn't even admit that Hartstad actually died.
Imagine. I mean, just seems like the type of thing that a Venture would do.
It's very much so.
This is when the term gaslighting was invented.
So the Anarch Revolt continued, and that's a whole topic that we could go into. But eventually, the Anarch Revolt kind of started to end. And around that time, there was something known as the Convention of Thorns. The Conventions of Thorns was really basically a meeting of the elders that gave birth to the Camarilla as we know it today. So the elders got together and they established some traditions. And they basically said these traditions are going to be the basis of our law. Specifically, let's go through some of them.
Okay.
Gotta go back up.
I'm excited.
Ooh, yeah. So there are 6 traditions. The 6 traditions that they swore to uphold, which are attributed to Cain.
Oh.
That Cain actually origin of all vampires. Supposedly passed to his progeny that this was his 6 rules. The first tradition was the Masquerade. Thou shalt not reveal thy nature to those not of the blood. Doing so shall renounce thy claim of blood.
Oh.
That means that you let the mortals know that you got fangs, and some vampires are allowed to go drag you in front of the prince and turn you into ash.
So you basically became an outlaw in vampire society.
Absolutely. The second tradition,
the right to bear arms.
Kind of the domain, or the right to at least use your bare arms. Thy domain is thine own concern. All others owe thee respect while in it. None may challenge thy word while in thy domain.
Oh.
So this is one of the reasons.
This is my house.
Exactly. So one of the reasons why territory in the Camarilla is so important, even though the entire city is the prince's domain.
Right.
The third tradition, the progeny. Thou shalt sire another only with permission of thine elder. If thou createst another without thine elder's leave, both thee and thy progeny shall be slain.
Ooh.
I think there's a beginning to a video game that starts that way.
Yes, there is.
So the fourth tradition, the accounting. Not the accountant, but the accounting. Those thou create are thine own child. Wait. Am I reading that properly?
I don't
Those thou create are thine own childer.
Those you create are your children.
Man, that did not make sense in my brain. Until thy progeny shall be released, thou shalt command them in all things. Thy sins are thine to endure.
Oh, wow. So basically they're saying if you were embraced by someone, they own you.
Exactly. There is actually even a rite in which I think it's called it's Latin, but basically it's like something night, the release of night or something, which the elder basically, or the sire, takes the child or in front of the council or in front of the prince and basically says, I am I
release them.
I've released them. And if the prince says no, they're still yours, you take them back. You say, God dang it, buddy.
Get back in the basement.
The fifth tradition, hospitality.
That sounds nice.
Honor one another's domain. When thou comest to a foreign city, thou shalt present thyself so to the one who ruleth there. Without the word of acceptance, thou art nothing.
Ooh. So again, if you show up someplace and you don't announce that you're there, you're pretty much free game for anybody.
Yeah. These are the loopholes that one vampire can get a tasty snack.
I can see some fun shenanigans that could happen.
And then finally, the sixth tradition, which may break some of those shenanigans, destruction.
Ooh.
Thou art forbidden to destroy another of thy kind. The right of destruction belongeth only to thine elder. Only the eldest among thee shall call the blood hunt.
Oh, so blood hunt. So that's basically like, hey, we're getting a posse together and we're going to go hunt this guy down, huh?
Yep. So everybody knows that diablerie is the greatest sin amongst the vampiric and amongst the kindred. So the blood hunt is basically the only situation in which a law-abiding vampire could reasonably actually commit a diablerie.
Oh, that just kind of gives you a free out on that?
Yeah.
That seems strange.
Once the blood hunt is opened, that vampire's life is forfeit, so none of these traditions apply.
Oh, no tradition applies to them. Okay. So again, it's kind of like that whole outlaw status thing.
Yeah, there's actually an outlaw, which is something that can happen. And outlaws are not part of the blood hunt. Outlaws are kind of a mediate thing where they're like, oh, they don't belong to the Camarilla, so like we don't give them any benefit, but we're not blood hunting them.
Gotcha.
So don't fucking kill them. Anyway, so these traditions were passed in the Convention of Thorns. It was in like 1493. And they were accepted as law. Representatives from the Bruja, Gangrel, Malkavian, Nosferatu, Toreador, Tremere, and Ventrue clans officially joined the sect, while those speaking for the Lasombra and Temiche, who were majorly Anarchs, rebelled against what they considered an offensive ultimatum and went on the
Went on the what?
Went on to form the Sabbat.
Gotcha.
So basically, the Lasombra, the Temiche, they went on to form the Sabbat. So after the Convention of Thorns, even though the Convention of Thorns was a very significant point for the Camarilla, it was basically the birth of the Camarilla. It essentially set forth the next 5 centuries of conflict between the Camarilla, the Anarchs, and the Sabbat. So basically, you had the 3 groups. The Anarchs are essentially those who refused to adhere to the Elders' rule. And then a subsect of those called the Sabbat, mainly composed of the Lasombra and the Temiche, they deemed that not only should we not listen to our elders, but we should actively hunt them and consume them because they are the biggest threat to us.
Yeah, they're just waiting to slaughter us or hand us over to the slaughterhouse is what they're saying.
So for many years, the Anarchs were essentially the disenfranchised of the Camarilla, while the Sabbat are the boogeymen.
Gotcha.
So that brings us up to more recent times. And here, that basically also was the lore of the previous game. So the Vampire the Masquerade before 5th edition. 5th edition, however, because there was such a gap in production, 5th edition had to kind of fast forward time, catch up to where we are now, and try to add some more backstory to the whole bit. So in 5th edition, they established that many elders succumbed to something known as the Beckoning.
The Beckoning.
The Beckoning. Now, the Beckoning is a call to the Eldar blood, drawing Eldars from wherever they are throughout the world. Eldars. Eldar. Well, yeah. 40K,
I was waiting.
Yeah, no, you're right. Those sneaky space elves.
Yep, the space elves.
No, so the Beckoning affected elders, Methuselah, like basically everything above, I can't remember if it's 9th generation above, I think is the rule to give it. So basically they feel this calling to the Middle East, and they don't know officially what's supposed to happen there. The Sabbat believed in the jihad, basically the war against the elders, and these elders might be being called to fend off the Sabbat from the ancients, like from the Methuselah, from the antediluvians. There may be some great coming of, some antediluvian or Methuselah that's stepping out of their, centuries old cavern. No one really knows. All they know is that these elders are essentially suffering for this call, and if they don't heed it, they kind of start to go insane. So during this period of time, something else happens too. Unfortunately, the political agencies of the world gain wind that there might be powers out there that they don't control. And
no
for
way.
Something like the CIA, that's not cool. You wouldn't think that the government finds things that might be skirting the rules, doesn't want to stick their nose in it. So a second Inquisition is born, and it's born from essentially a lot of the security state of the big nations.
Gotcha.
So the public doesn't know about this, but
yeah, I haven't heard of it at all.
Well, that's very good. I guess they love. It'd be pretty shitty to learn about this, actually.
Yeah.
You kind of learn about it when a bunch of guys in your front door start lighting your house on fire.
Oh man, I hate when that happens.
Yeah. So during the Second Inquisition, a raid on many of the strongholds of the Camarilla are undertaken.
So how did they find out about these vampires?
Well, so initially, I don't know initially how the reports got in, because these organizations have always been something that the Camarilla have tried to influence. But unfortunately, when some of the government organizations got a hold of ShrekNet, which is essentially the Nosferatu interweb. That was connecting all the elders, or essentially all the Camarilla posts together. Then they just had this smorgasbord of data.
Oh man, somebody forgot to log out in a cafe or something like that, and they're just like, "What is this?"
Yeah, password 1234.
Yeah.
things could fall. So basically, in response to the Second Inquisition, I mean, whole cities fell.
Oh, wow.
In a small period of time. This was
like the city fell, or just the vampire population fell?
The vampire population
Okay.
of like the Insidious. I think so I'm probably going to be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure that the vampire population of, I think, the fall of London is one of the big ones.
Oh, wow.
Where that's one of like the precipitating events that leads to the Greater Inquisition.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, guess what Eldar start doing? They start shoving the neophytes
Oh,
towards the Inquisition.
no.
So this kind of stuff happens, and specifically, a lot of the higher clans end up doing this to the lower clans. So that Ventrue starts saying, "Hey, Brujah, you should go fight those people, and I'm not going to be here because I don't exist."
I can see that happening.
So this led to something called the Conclave of Prague, or the First Convention of Prague, which was an international gathering held by basically the highest ranking members of the Camarilla in 2012. So during the conclave, the Anarchs were coming, and they were claiming that the Camarilla meddled with the world national governments are responsible for this. Now, the Camarilla blamed the Anarchs for their use of the internet and modern technology like ShrekNet and things like that. So they didn't agree on what was happening. Now, at the time, Hartstad the Younger.
He's still around.
He's still around.
Wow.
So up until 2012, he was the Prince of London. He was assisted by his basically right-hand man was a Brujah named Theobald. And Theobald got to brewing with the other Brujah.
Oh, no.
And he decided to have a conversation with Hartstad that involved a shotgun filled with dragonfire rounds.
Ooh.
Hartstad is no more.
Oh, God. So, I mean, we're going to have a Hartstad the Third here pretty soon.
Fortunately, this time they learned their lesson from history, and Hartstad did not arise from the annals.
Oh my. Okay.
Now, this bell that rang out across the world, so to speak, also led with the Brujah leaving the Camarilla officially to join the Anarchs with the Gangrel.
I mean, it took them a while, but I'm glad they did.
Yeah, so basically, en masse across the world, many of them left. So while the Camarilla had kind of settled over that 500-year period to kind of be the de facto rule for most cities, and they treated the Anarchs as kind of like the rough biker crowd that, like, they don't listen to us, but we're always kind of fighting for control, but in the end, they're gonna.
Yeah.
This was basically open war with the Anarchs.
Oh, no.
Yeah, this was the Ventrue clan specifically essentially declared war on the Anarchs, and that this was.
So they basically said, "We're at war with the Anarchs. Go get them, everybody else."
No, they actually were serious this time.
Really?
Hartstad was a very influential figure, and now, if you compare before and after, the clan symbol for the Ventrue includes the Roman gladius added to it to signify that they're at war.
Oh, so somebody got PR.
Right? They don't fight their wars, but
no.
They're at war.
Yes.
At war status. Hashtag at war.
War were declared.
The Anarchs started to include everyone that the Camarilla was just associating with them anyway, which was also the Caitiff, those who do not show a clan lineage, the Thin Bloods, and basically anybody else that wasn't attached to one of the main clans.
Those who were just, dissatisfied with their lot in life.
The disenfranchised. So officially, no vampire of 14th generation or higher is welcome within the Camarilla anymore. So the Anarchs, on the other hand, were all too happy to separate with all the rules and regulations of the Camarilla. They only agreed to uphold one of the traditions, which is the Masquerade.
I mean, that's probably for the best. I mean, we saw what happened when all the governments found out that they still existed.
Bad stuff happened.
Yeah.
So the Camarilla formally lost the Brujah and the Gangrel, but talks were happening with other clans. So the Scourge, the Assamites, that used to be this horrific scourge during the Dark Ages.
So scourgy, yes.
Basically a clan of assassins, a subset of them named the Banu Hakim, came to the Camarilla in good faith, and they came to an agreement called the Odense Pact, where they basically joined the Camarilla officially.
I cannot see where that's going to go wrong.
Not assassins who literally are addicted to diablerie.
Yeah.
No. Over the years since then, Some other clans have essentially approached. The ministry, I think, approached the Anarchs, and they formed. So the ministry was what's left of the Setites, or the Setites that are not fighting the jihad, like with the Sabbat. And also groups like the Sombra basically came to the Camarilla, but not as a unified clan. The Sombra started showing up to Camarilla-controlled venues and basically joining cities on a city-by-city basis. However, they have a very interesting way of paying for their entry into service, which is to basically go find a Sabbat elder, stake him, drag him to the leader of the city and say, hey, does this buy me entry into your little play?
Okay.
So yeah, if a Lasombra is part of the Camarilla, that's a hard motherfucker.
Let's remember that. Okay.
Chicago is basically one of the first domains where this is like a big thing where this happens.
Yeah.
So, all right. So that basically takes us up to modern day. That's essentially where we find the Camarilla today. So let's take some time to talk about their organization. So who would you say is in a city? Let's start the city. We're not going to go outside the city first. At the city, the top is the prince.
Prince, obviously. Yes.
So basically this executive of the Camarilla is essentially ruler and the law of the city. They have complete authority, which has invested them from the ivory tower, which is essentially the centralized Camarilla.
Okay.
They basically control as long as they can hold on to it.
Do they receive support from the greater Camarilla?
Yes, in theory.
In theory, okay.
Well, you have to think of it as members of the ivory tower, basically the ruling inner circle. They may support a prince that they need to be there.
Okay.
But if you're a prince that doesn't need to be there and you ask for support, you're probably going to get one of these other people after you, which I'll mention in a little bit. So the prince basically creates their group of enforcers / political appointees. Now, outside that group, before we get into it, is going to be the Primogen.
Okay.
Now, the Primogen are individuals which are a member of a Primogen council. And basically, each Primogen is a representative of their clan.
Okay.
So they could be the elder of the clan, but basically they're essentially someone notable, and they're usually holding power because being the Primogen of a clan means that they have domain over a portion of the city. That's a big thing.
So they have influence.
Absolutely. They are second in command only to the prince.
Okay.
So sometimes prince may see the Primogen council as a thorn in their side, especially with cities that have like a robust vampire population. Other times the Primogen council may be puppets,
some kind of token.
Exactly. They may be basically policed by the other members of the prince's entourage. So the prince's right-hand agent, however, is the seneschal. The seneschal is essentially the toady, but like the toady who's competent.
Say that to their face.
Right. Basically, usually the first person, the only person that the prince actually trusts. They're usually a person that has proved themselves so valuable and so trustworthy to the prince that they're actually brought into the greater scheme of things. And they usually have the prince's authority in almost all their matters. So the seneschal is definitely going to be doing a lot of the political maneuvering for the prince within the city, dealing with the Primogen council, representing the prince in a lot of things. Their formal representation of power, though, is the sheriff.
Oh, okay.
So the sheriff is the appointee responsible for the enforcement of princely decrees and enacting punishments, retributions, or other forms of physical atonement within the domain.
Do what I say or I send the big guy.
Yeah, exactly. So the sheriff is basically going to be someone that the prince has managed to usually gain leverage on, but also knows that they probably themselves wouldn't want to mess with.
Right.
They're going to be the person that they can trust, at least to know that they're going to do their duty. Now, that sheriff may appoint hounds. Hounds are basically kind of like deputies. Usually they're more like attack dogs, which is where the name comes from.
Okay.
So the sheriff may need to have some hounds with them when they go to
kind of backup.
Yeah. Some sheriffs are just so badass they don't need those. In bigger formal domains, like think of big cities, old cities, probably all throughout Europe and, the East Coast, the chancellor may be appointed. And the chancellor is a maintainer of the records of prestation.
Hmm.
Prestation. This is the act of trading favors.
Okay.
It's a word that I was not familiar with. We always just called it the favors.
Yeah, the boons.
But this is basically how kindred society essentially operates, is through the trading of favors and boons. Yeah, there's a bunch of words that we didn't use before.
No,
So
I mean, yeah, and I mean, I don't feel you have to use these words. Just, use them as a reference.
Yeah. So
scaffolding.
Exactly. And in the formalist version of the Camarilla, the Chancellor basically reads the roll of domain debts before any official gathering of the city's kindred.
That must take a while if you've got a lot of kindred and a lot of debts going around.
Yeah. I mean, you think about not only like the political moverings of like having your debt known, but then actually every time you meet,
it's reminded.
Yeah. That's kind of interesting.
We know, Terry. We know.
I know. I borrowed that car last week. I get it. So sometimes taking this role, but other times basically separated. The harpy acts as the prince's voice.
Okay.
So the harpy is essentially where the seneschal is, the political mover. The harpy is very much the social presence of the prince. The harpy is often chosen to basically set the tone, also carry the prince's edicts into announcement. Okay.
So kind of the town crier sort of thing.
Yeah, and you're also going to generally choose a harpy who is going to know how to approach all the different members of kindred society so that you can get rid of the friction if you need it, or
grease the wheels.
Or opposite if you need to.
Create friction, create chaos. I can see it.
So sometimes one of the harpies' roles, or maybe a separate entity, is the Keeper of Elysium. Now, the Keeper of Elysium is basically an honorific title that serves a very specific importance. And that's that the practical responsibility is that the holder of the Keeper of Elysium is the caretaker of the sites declared as Elysium.
Okay. And what does that mean?
So Elysium are areas in the city that are declared by the prince to be essentially off limits for any type of struggling other than talking.
Okay.
So vampiric abilities, violence, none of these things are going to happen there.
So this is the social forum, basically.
This is sacred ground to the kindred. So the prince is essentially going to hold court on Elysium. They're going to, if you're going to meet with another vampire, you're probably going to ask to meet on Elysium because then they're not going to be plotting to stab you while you're there. They're going to have to wait till you leave.
Okay. Yeah.
The use of vampiric disciplines on Elysium grounds is essentially punishable by the Keeper of Elysium.
Only if you get caught.
Only if you get caught. That's true. I'm pretty much on this whole list. So some of the less used titles are the Whip. The Whip is a clan title, so the Whip may be a member of the clan of, various vampiric clans. Sorry. They're appointed by a primogen, basically of being a motivator.
Okay.
So the Whip is kind of like a mixture of the seneschal, Sharpie.
The Sharpie?
My gosh. The Sharpie. The Sharpie.
I'm guessing you meant to say Harpy and Sheriff?
Seneschal, Sheriff. I like that title. You are the Sharpie. You are my instrument. You are my instrument of decree upon the board that is my Elysium. My edicts cannot be erased.
They are permanent as this marker I used.
That's great. Yes, the harpy sheriff / basically the voice or the force of the primogen. So the whip is usually, because the primogen lack as much authority as the prince, the primogen exercise their authority through the whip, and the whip generally goes around and says, hey, the boss man says you should be doing this.
Gotcha.
And in a big clan, that's probably a pretty potent position. In a small clan where there's like 3 of you, and you're probably like, Steve, I heard. I heard it when I was there, Steve.
You don't need to get Johnny over here to tell me. I was right next to you when you told him.
Heard the edict when you said it to the prince. You don't have to fucking talk to me again. Well, I just want to make sure you heard it, because we get it.
Your neck's looking pretty good there, Tony.
So yeah, whips, we haven't had those in our games, but it's an interesting idea. Because the Tremere that we played, we kind of had a whip.
Yeah, I mean...
Elena was kind of like...
Yeah, the Tremere clan in that game was quite robust.
Yeah, she was kind of the one who's just like, hey, the permission's telling that you need to go do this.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, you're here. I'm scared.
Okay, let me go take care of that for you.
And so the last notable member of the last notable title is Outcast. This is what we mentioned briefly before. So an outcast is a kindred who is considered persona non grata.
Gotcha.
So this is not someone who's actively being hunted, but they do not enjoy the rights and privileges of anyone who is acknowledged as kindred in their domain.
Yeah.
So being labeled as an outcast is like, yeah, you're going to have to get out of town. Like, we're not going to actively hunt you, and maybe you can earn back into our good graces, but like, you're not protected.
No.
You should leave.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So outside the city, as we mentioned, there's the Inner Circle, also known as the Ivory Tower. So the Inner Circle is the true hub of the Camarilla power and is comprised of one representative from each clan, usually the eldest member really in existence. The group meets once every 13 years to plan out the business and direction of vampiric society as a whole.
13 years. Yeah. So they're moving slowly.
Well, you don't kind of go up there, I bring a motion to let's talk about the new cell phone TikTok thing. That was last decade.
So what do you guys think about this whole woke thing? Is it real?
I was so confused. I just woke up.
In Rome, we didn't really worry about that stuff as much.
So the Inner Circles enforce their power, or the Inner Circle, the Ivory Tower enforces their power through the use of Justicars.
Oh, that sounds scary.
This is something that actually is probably used in a lot of vampire games. So the Justicar is a judge appointed by the Inner Circle to be the Camarilla's eyes and hand out and if necessary, their fists.
Ooh.
So the Justicars are really, if you want to show the force of old vampires coming into the city and exerting their authority, you send a Justicar in. These are usually powerful vampires, often vampires that tend to lend themselves to not staying in one place for some reason.
Okay.
People who, want to travel around and bully princes. But Justicar is going to be taken seriously by any prince. Basically, they have the speaking power of the Inner Circle. So if a prince basically decides not to obey their decree, problems are going to happen.
Gotcha.
So the Justicar needs its boys to come with him. Those are going to come in the form of archons.
Okay. So
an archon could be a scout, a enforcement party, or just the prelude to a Justicar's involvement. So a prince hears that the archon's sniffing around their city, they're probably going to start looking out pretty quickly. They don't carry the authority that the Justicar has, but they're going to lead to it.
Right.
So like you
they're just a prelude to what's about to happen.
Yes. They usually are also a temporary position when a Justicar needs to do something.
I see.
So
kind of like appointing a deputy.
Yeah. So the Alistar, sure exactly how this is pronounced, but similar to the Justicar, while Justicars and Archons are like the visible form of the Inner Circle's like law enforcement, they're the ones that are going to be vocal, they're going to be seen, they're going to use their position and their presence to enact change too. The Alistar is basically going to be the secret police. These are the people who are going to make people go away.
I see.
So yeah, they're basically the secret police of the Inner Circle. You got it. You don't hear about these people.
Nobody likes them.
No.
They don't even like each other. They don't like themselves.
I wouldn't think so. You're basically going to get suspicion that somebody was one after they left town and some member of the Prince's Council went away. That's kind of thing. So finally, we have the Imperator. And the Imperator is a Justicar of Justicars. It's a field marshal.
Wow. Okay.
Imperator is basically when, like I said, some of these are only going to occur when essentially the Camarilla needs to go to war. So the Imperator is that type of thing. They're going to basically enact a wide scale effort. They're going to deal with problems that have wide scale gravity and influence. They're basically going to be chosen when the Ivory Tower essentially needs a show of force that is undeniable. And if needed to, if roused to war, there is the Duke Velorum is, once again, it's
Okay,
Latin
yeah.
for something of war. I'm not sure what Dukes is.
Ducis.
But basically, they're a warlord of the Camarilla.
Okay.
So, if it mobilizes forces, it will basically pick someone among the rank of Justicars and basically turn them into a battle marshal.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to, go fight off the wolves at the door.
So these are all things that are pretty far removed from any games that we have ever played.
Yeah. So, which kind of brings that kind of brings us back to a conversation we had in one of our earlier podcasts. None of these exist in Requiem because Requiem didn't allow a international community of, vampires.
Well, it's I kind of get the feeling that maybe that existed to them, the people making the game, but they're just no one's going to go that far. Why bother, making that structure?
Well, Requiem also had things in the lore that kind of prevented this stuff from happening. So, for example, up to 2012, Hartstad the Younger was a prince. Also, little spoiler out there for some of those people, Patricia took the name Tyler off from one of her mortal lovers, and it ended up controlling Chicago's airport, Chicago O'Hare. So, in modern Chicago setting, the sire or the childer of Robin Hood controls the airport in Chicago.
That's an old lore, not current lore. That's a current lore. Okay. Yeah. Wow, we never ran into her.
Well, because once again, these weren't the kind of things that we generally did. So the people, when you talk about the divide between Requiem and you talk to Masquerade, Requiem is really an intense personal journey about you and the vampire kindred politics in your city. And you're a pinpoint of light in the dark.
Gotcha.
They basically say, the whole point is it's just too dangerous for vampires to go traveling. So you don't have this stuff. The Vampire the Masquerade there is a legacy of people out here, and some of them are from Carthage and Rome, and Helen of Troy is sleeping in a bar in Chicago. And
that's interesting as fuck, though.
It is very interesting. It also kind of puts a lot of pressure on the storyteller to basically be a historian.
Right. I get that, but it's you don't have to know what bar she's in, that's the other thing.
No, and I gotta say, as much as I'm a little bit, as much as I like Requiem better and I'm a little resistance, I picked up that theme when we started playing 5th. That's kind of why we ran into Alexander Hamilton,
right,
and stuff like that. So it is very fun. It's also one of the fun parts about building a city of vampires yourself is going through and trying to dig up local legends and putting them in positions and creating these characters. If you don't want to do that, that's when you go for these books like Chicago by Night or The Fall of London, which has a bunch of the named kindred there and stuff like that. And you get to have these kind of things. But Requiem specifically just basically said that if any vampire was that old, they would have fallen into torpor a couple times already, and they just don't know who they are.
Right.
So, that's why you're not going to have it. So, well, we got any final questions about the Camarilla in modern day society?
None that I can really think of.
So if you do play a campaign that takes in a Camarilla city, you're likely going to interact with your clan's primogen. They're going to be the first political authority you really deal with on a personal level. You screw up, the primogen's probably going to be like, hey man, you're looking like the rest of us are looking bad. You need to fix that. Or they're going to be like, that's a strike.
Yeah.
A couple more and I get to eat you. Going to Elysium is generally often a big event that happens. This is where vampires who do not like to come out of their little hidey holes when we get together and interact on safe territory. It's always a great fun to play Elysium and show all the scary people.
Yeah.
It's always
have a couple of them eyeing you as you're walking by.
So good. And then ultimately, as things progress, you might run into the princes, the seneschal, the sheriff, the harpy, likely more dealing with them in their role at first before they're being sent after you to interact. So usually escalation up to the prince is probably saved for the end of a campaign. They just don't want to deal with all the fresh bloods.
Yeah. Why would they?
Yeah. Not unless you're, a Tremere baby with a silver spoon.
2 silver spoons.
So I hope you've enjoyed this little jaunt through the kindred society that is known as the Camarilla. It's probably one of two really good solutions to start games in. If you want to start with the political, I do recommend the Camarilla before the Anarchs.
And it's a good structure to start out with that kind of lends itself to introduce you to themes that you're going to run into in all three, no matter what. Like each one, you're still going to be the bottom rung of the ladder. You're still going to have to work your way up. Just the route to do that is slightly different.
Yeah. And if you if you decide to dive into books and movies by Vampire the Masquerade.
The Macarena?
Mecrium? The Mequium. It's the new version of Vampire Lore, right?
Macarena.
You're likely to hear about the Camarilla because that's essentially where most of that struggle is going to be pulled from.
I mean, out of the three organizations, they're probably the biggest.
Oh, definitely. Like Anarchs can, like I said, they'll have their own territories and they'll get together when the Camarilla comes into town. But they don't feel the need to basically communicate back and forth and organize. Yeah. Sometimes a couple barons will get together just to be like, hey, we're watching each other's backs, right? But they're not going to like have a nationwide conference. Right. The Camarilla are going to be like, oh, we've recorded who's been in your position for the past 300 years and we've got lists of grudges. So, yeah. Well, if you want to play a bit of political campaign, I think this is your place. If not, stay tuned because we're going to go into the rabble rousers, the hellions of the Anarchs, and then eventually into the
anti-political, but still political. Yeah.
But before that, we're going to start exploring the clans of the Camarilla. So stay tuned for a deep dive into these wonderful clans of beauty, of authority, of blood magic, and some of the people we don't like to talk about. The rest. All right. Well, guys, we'll see you later, and thanks for joining us at the table.
Goodbye.